There's a peculiar kind of silence that surrounds many of us, one that doesn't announce itself with loneliness or visible despair, but with a subtle erosion of connection. In Irvin D. Yalom's existential framework, isolation is not always loud or tragic. More often it is quiet, insidious, and almost invisible. It's in the unspoken tensions between lovers who no longer touch. It's in the daily conversations that never go deeper than the weather. It's in the endless scroll through social media feeds, filled with smiles and curated joy, while a deep emptiness lingers just behind the screen. We live in a world that pretends to be connected, yet many of us walk around trapped in a psychological cage, unseen, untouched, and unheard. Yalom distinguishes between three types of isolation: interpersonal, intrapersonal, and existential. Interpersonal isolation is what most of us recognize, the absence of meaningful relationships. Intrapersonal isolation is more nuanced. It's when a person is divided within themselves, when parts of the self are denied, hidden, or repressed. But existential isolation is the deepest of all. It's the fundamental truth that no matter how close we get to someone, we can never fully merge our consciousness with theirs. We are ultimately alone in our minds. That truth is terrifying for some, liberating for others, but for most, it's simply avoided. This avoidance is precisely where the invisible cage begins to form. The modern world gives us 1,000 ways to avoid confronting our isolation. We busy ourselves with careers, social events, television shows, and endless entertainment. Yalom, in Existential Psychotherapy, writes, most of us spend our lives running from the confrontation with ourselves. And yet the harder we run, the more disconnected we become, not just from others, but from ourselves. Consider the character of Betty, a patient Yalom describes in Love's Executioner. On the surface, she appeared vibrant and independent, proud of her solitary lifestyle. But beneath her confidence lay years of repressed longing and unresolved grief. Her isolation had become a performance, one that even fooled her. As therapy progressed, Yalom gently peeled back the layers of self-deception until Betty could no longer deny the ache she carried. She wasn't just alone, she was lonely. And she had been for a very long time. This kind of slow, creeping isolation is common. It begins innocently, a missed call here, an unreturned text there. A friend moves away, a parent passes, or a breakup occurs. Life shifts, and slowly the circle around us shrinks. But instead of confronting this shrinkage, we often adapt. We tell ourselves we're just busy, or that everyone drifts apart eventually. We normalize the disconnection, not realizing that we're gradually cutting off the lifelines that nourish our emotional well-being. Over time, this isolation calcifies. It becomes the background noise of our lives, something we barely notice until it becomes unbearable. What makes this cage so dangerous is that it doesn't always feel like suffering. It often disguises itself as independence or efficiency. "I don't need anyone," we say proudly, not realizing that the very act of saying it reveals a wound. Yalom warns against this self-sufficiency mask, writing, "To the extent that one denies the need for others, one denies a part of the self. This denial creates a split, a rift between who we are and who we pretend to be. And with every act of denial, the walls of the cage grow higher." In therapy, Yalom often emphasizes presence, the act of simply being with another person without judgment, agenda, or performance. This presence, he argues, is what starts to break down the invisible cage. When someone truly sees us without trying to fix us or change us, a door opens. Not a door out of isolation entirely, because that, in an existential sense, is impossible, but a door toward meaningful connection, toward being less alone. Even in group therapy, Yalom observed that participants would initially present curated versions of themselves, polished, guarded, safe. But over time, as trust built and facades fell, something remarkable happened. People began to share their real fears, regrets, and longings. And in those moments of raw truth, they found what they had been missing all along. Not solutions, but solidarity. the knowledge that others too were struggling with the same silent battles. Isolation thrives in the absence of truth. It feeds on performance and pretenses, but it begins to dissolve the moment we name it, when we stop pretending we're fine, when we allow ourselves to be seen not as polished personas, but as vulnerable, flawed, deeply human beings. In that naming, we create a space for others to do the same. And suddenly, the silence isn't so loud, the cage isn't so tight, and the soul begins to breathe again. Connection is often portrayed as the most natural human longing, something we all desire, something we all need. And yet, so many people run from it, not because they don't want to be seen or known, but because the act of being seen threatens something much deeper inside them. Irvin D. Yalom, in Existential Psychotherapy, offers a powerful insight into this paradox. That authentic connection with others also brings us face to face with our greatest vulnerabilities. And for many, that's far more frightening than loneliness. To connect with another person is to open yourself to the possibility of rejection, abandonment, betrayal, or judgment. Real intimacy demands emotional risk. It requires us to let go of the masks we've carefully constructed, those polished versions of ourselves we use to navigate social life, and expose the raw, often chaotic truth beneath. But what if that truth is ugly? What if we are not lovable once someone truly sees us? These unconscious questions pulse beneath the surface of every hesitant relationship, every withdrawn gesture, every carefully controlled conversation. One of Yalom's patients, whom he describes in Love's Executioner, was terrified of love, not because she had never experienced it, but because she had been burned by it. Each new opportunity for closeness reminded her of past traumas, memories she thought she had buried. For her, emotional closeness wasn't warmth, it was danger. And so, she built emotional walls, convincing herself and others that she was simply independent. But beneath that facade lay a profound fear, the fear of being hurt again. This phenomenon is strikingly common. Many people confuse independence with isolation, strength with emotional detachment. Yalom argues that these defenses are not pathological in themselves. They're adaptive. At some point, they were necessary. Maybe they protected a child from an abusive parent or a young adult from unbearable heartbreak. But what once served as protection later becomes a prison. And in adulthood, those same walls that kept danger out now also keep love out. The irony is painful. The very thing we crave, connection, is the thing we've learned to fear the most. This fear manifests in countless subtle ways. The person who constantly jokes but never shares anything personal, the partner who picks fights whenever the relationship deepens, the friend who disappears whenever they feel too close. These behaviors are not always conscious. In many cases, people don't even realize they're sabotaging their own intimacy. They're simply responding to a deep-rooted anxiety they've never fully examined. Yalom emphasizes that we fear connection because it mirrors back to us our fragility. When we truly care for someone, we are no longer emotionally autonomous. Their pain affects us. Their loss devastates us. And worst of all, their eventual departure, whether by death or distance, is inevitable. Loving someone means accepting that one day you will either lose them or they will lose you. That, Yalom writes, is the existential dilemma at the heart of love. It's what makes connection so beautiful and so terrifying. In his clinical work, Yalom noticed that people often projected their own self-judgment onto others. They assumed others would criticize them for the same reasons they criticized themselves. A client ashamed of their past believed others would reject them for it. A man terrified of his insecurities assumed that a partner, if she ever saw them, would walk away. In reality, these fears were often ungrounded, but they felt real because they stemmed from an unresolved inner narrative, a deep belief that if people really knew me, they wouldn't stay. The path to healing, Yalom suggests, is not in denying this fear, but in exploring it openly. In therapy, he invites patients to sit with the discomfort of vulnerability, to test the waters of trust in small, deliberate steps. And time after time, they discover that what they feared was rarely as catastrophic as imagined. People didn't run. They didn't attack. Sometimes they even leaned in. That moment when someone reveals their inner world and is still accepted is transformative. It challenges years of internalized shame and offers a glimpse of what authentic connection can be. Still, this process is neither quick nor easy. As Yalom notes, the capacity for intimacy is not a given. It's a developmental achievement. It requires not just willingness, but courage. It involves confronting past pain, dismantling psychological armor, and risking the very outcomes we once fought to avoid. But without this risk, we remain stuck, safe, perhaps, but deeply alone. And that is the tragedy of silence. Not just that it hides our pain, but that it prevents the possibility of joy. When we fear connection, we also fear love, belonging, and meaning. We live cautiously, avoiding not just hurt, but also the richness of human experience. We may never be wounded again, but we may never truly live either. To choose connection, then, is to choose life, with all its risks, messiness, and heartbreak. And in doing so, we begin to dismantle the fear behind the silence. Not by pretending we're unafraid, but by moving forward despite the fear. That is where freedom begins. For those who have lived in the shadows of isolation, whether by choice, trauma, or circumstance, the idea of connection often seems like a distant dream, or worse, a dangerous trap. And yet, it is within the very act of relationship that healing can begin. Irvin D. believed deeply in the power of the therapeutic relationship, not as a tool or technique, but as the very heart of transformation. In his words, it's the relationship that heals. This is more than a poetic notion. In Existential Psychotherapy, Yalom lays out a philosophical and clinical foundation for understanding why relationships, especially those rooted in authenticity, are so essential to psychological freedom. He draws from existential thought, emphasizing that the experience of isolation is not simply social or emotional. It is a fundamental condition of being human. No one else can live our lives, feel our exact pain, or face our death for us. But while we are ultimately alone in our existence, we are not condemned to be isolated. Relationship, when it is real, becomes the bridge between our internal solitude and the shared experience of being alive. To move from isolation to freedom is not about escaping the fact of our separateness. It is about embracing it, while simultaneously recognizing that despite the walls that divide us, we can still reach out and be reached. In therapy, this begins with presence. Not just physical presence, but emotional, ethical, and existential presence. The therapist becomes someone who chooses to step into the client's world, not to fix or direct, but to accompany. This act alone, Yalom suggests, is revolutionary. Consider the story of Ginny, a woman in her early 40s, whose life had been shaped by abandonment. She came to therapy after a series of failed relationships, convinced that she was too much for anyone to love. Her sessions began with surface-level pleasantries, but they were guarded, brittle. When Yalom gently asked what she feared would happen if she let herself truly connect, she paused. "I'll fall," she whispered. It wasn't just metaphorical, she meant it. Emotional openness felt like stepping off a cliff. Instead of challenging that fear intellectually, Yalom offered her something different: consistency. Week after week, he showed up. He listened. He stayed, even when she grew distant or hostile. Over time, Ginny began to test the relationship. She would share a small piece of vulnerability, then wait, watching his face for signs of disgust or boredom. But those signs never came. And slowly, the very thing she feared most, the fall, became something she could endure because someone was there to catch her. This kind of relational repair is not unique to therapy. It can happen in friendships, families, even romantic partnerships. But therapy is often the first place someone experiences it deliberately. There are no distractions, no roles to perform, no scripts to follow, just two people, face to face, trying to make sense of what it means to be alive together. Yalom believed that the therapeutic relationship is a rehearsal for life, in learning how to be known, how to stay present, how to speak what was once unspeakable. The client gains not just insight, but freedom. Freedom from the false selves they've created to survive. Freedom from the internalized beliefs that told them they were unworthy. Freedom to show up in other relationships as they truly are. Of course, this path is not without risk. The more meaningful the relationship becomes, the more terrifying it is to lose. Clients often express fear that the therapist will leave, judge, or eventually betray them. But these fears are not obstacles, they are invitations. Each fear that arises is an opportunity to work through a deeper wound, and each rupture that is acknowledged and repaired strengthens the foundation of trust. Yalom describes the here and now encounter as one of the most powerful tools in therapy. When both therapist and client engage in honest dialogue about their relationship as it unfolds, something remarkable happens. The room becomes real. No longer is therapy about stories from the past or projections into the future. It becomes a living, breathing experience of connection. And for many clients, it is the first time they feel truly alive in someone else's presence. This is not just emotional healing, it is existential liberation. When we experience ourselves as seen and accepted in our full humanity, we are no longer imprisoned by shame or fear. We recognize that while the fundamental separateness of human life cannot be erased, it can be softened. We can live with it, even thrive within it, when we know we are not entirely alone. The power of the healing relationship lies not in what is said, but in what is offered. A space where the self can emerge from hiding. A place where silence is met with empathy, where fear is held rather than judged, and where the soul learns, slowly but surely, that it is safe to exist in the presence of another. Among all forms of human suffering, there is one that eludes explanation, one that is felt in the quietest hours and yet echoes through everything we do: existential isolation. This is not the loneliness of having no one to talk to, nor the sorrow of a broken relationship. It is something far more fundamental, more unsettling. It is the knowledge, often buried, sometimes conscious, that no one else can truly experience our world. That we are, in the final and most personal sense, alone. Irvin D. Yalom calls this the most profound form of isolation. In existential psychotherapy, he differentiates it from interpersonal and intrapersonal isolation. While interpersonal isolation refers to a lack of connection between people, and intrapersonal isolation refers to alienation within oneself, existential isolation is intrinsic to the human condition. It is the unbridgeable gap between one consciousness and another. We can be loved, understood, and even cherished, but no one will ever fully step into our skin and see the world as we do. This idea is not new. Philosophers such as Kierkegaard, Heidegger, and Sartre all wrestled with the stark aloneness of existence. But Yalom brought the concept down from the philosophical clouds and placed it directly into the therapy room. He observed that many of his clients were not suffering because they lacked social interaction, but because they were haunted by the sense that, no matter how much they connected with others, something essential about their inner life would always remain untouched. Take, for example, the case of Philip, a patient in his early 60s whom Yalom described in clinical essays. Philip had friends, a wife, even adult children who visited him regularly. Yet he felt an aching emptiness he couldn't explain. "I feel like I'm screaming in a glass box," he once said. Everyone could see him, but no one could hear. This metaphor captured something deeper than depression. It revealed the quiet terror of existing without ever truly being met. The danger of existential isolation is not just that it's painful, but that it's often misunderstood. Well-meaning friends might say, "But you're not alone, I'm here for you." and they are. But their presence does not erase the fact that each individual must ultimately face their thoughts, fears, and death alone. Yalom wrote, "We are born alone and die alone. Yet most of us spend our lives denying that fact. This denial is understandable. The awareness of existential isolation can be overwhelming, and yet, when we confront it directly, something transformative begins to happen. Rather than seeking to eliminate this form of isolation, which is impossible, Yalom suggests we learn to live with it honestly. He encourages therapists and clients alike to explore what it means to be alone and how we might create meaning in spite of it. In fact, it is often through the very act of acknowledging our existential solitude that we begin to forge deeper, more authentic connections with others. Not because the isolation disappears, but because we stop pretending it isn't there. Ironically, the shared recognition of existential aloneness can itself become a bond. Two people, both aware of their separate inner worlds, can sit across from each other and say, "I see you. I cannot feel what you feel, but I will be with you while you feel it." This is the essence of human companionship, not the illusion of unity, but the commitment to be present across the divide. This is where Yalom's approach shines. He does not seek to rescue clients from their aloneness, but invites them to sit with it, to explore it, even to find beauty within it. In one of his most well-known lines, he writes, "Though the physicality of death destroys us, the idea of death saves us." In the same way, the idea of existential isolation, when faced directly, can awaken us to life. It can compel us to be more present, more honest, more open. Because we know that no one can live our life for us, we begin to take greater ownership of how we live it. The fear of existential isolation often drives people into superficial relationships or frantic social activity. But once we stop running from that fear, we discover something liberating. We do not have to be fully understood to be loved. We do not have to merge with another to feel connected. We simply have to show up as we are, fully and without masks, and allow others to do the same. The therapist in this context becomes a witness rather than a fixer. Their role is not to make the client feel less alone, but to walk with them through their aloneness. In doing so, they offer what may be the most honest form of connection possible: solidarity without illusion. Existential isolation is a truth we cannot erase, but it is also a truth that can set us free. Free to love without possession, to speak without expecting complete understanding, to live without guarantees. And in that freedom, we find something even more powerful than comfort. We find authenticity. The soul, though it may remain untouched, is no longer unseen. In a world that moves faster every day, where digital noise often replaces real conversation and curated identities mask authentic selves, silence has taken on a new shape. It is no longer just the absence of sound, it is the absence of truth. The silence that surrounds us now is often disguised by the chatter of online personas, by polite small talk, by the constant ping of messages that say everything and nothing at all. And within this fragmented landscape, one central challenge remains. How do we choose connection, knowing how vulnerable, painful, and uncertain it can be? Irvin D. Yalom never offered easy answers. He never promised that connection would save us from the existential weight of being human. But he did offer something much more profound: the invitation to engage with others fully, courageously, and authentically, even when it hurts. In The Gift of Therapy, he reminds both patients and therapists that the healing power of therapy lies in the therapist's willingness to enter the patient's world fully. And this is not limited to therapy. It applies to all of us. Choosing connection in a fragmented world begins with a radical act: slowing down. In a culture that rewards speed, productivity, and multitasking, to stop and truly be present with another human being is almost subversive. Yet, it is exactly what our fractured society needs. True presence cannot be automated, outsourced, or condensed into 280 characters. It demands time. It demands that we listen not just to words, but to silences between words. It demands that we show up not with polished certainty, but with messy, honest humanity. This is what breaking the silence looks like. It is not about shouting louder. It is about speaking truthfully. It is about risking awkwardness, discomfort, and even rejection in pursuit of something real. And in a world increasingly defined by filters, both literal and psychological, realness has become rare and therefore sacred. Yalom often spoke of the here and now in therapy, the idea that the most important material in a session is not the client's past or hypothetical future, but the relationship unfolding in that moment. This principle, if adopted more broadly, could transform the way we relate to each other. Imagine if, in everyday life, we paid attention not only to what people say, but to how they say it, to their body language, to the energy behind their words. Imagine if we asked, "How are you really?" and waited long enough to hear the truth. Of course, this kind of presence is demanding. It asks us to set aside our distractions, our assumptions, and even our fear of not knowing what to say. It asks us to witness pain without trying to fix it immediately. And it asks us to reveal our own vulnerability as a signal that it is safe for others to do the same. Choosing connection also means rejecting the fantasy of perfection. Many people stay silent because they believe their mess is too much for others to bear. They fear that if they show their real selves, grief, anger, insecurity, they will be abandoned. But the opposite is often true. As Yalom observed through decades of clinical work, it is vulnerability, not polish, that creates intimacy. When one person dares to drop the mask, others often follow. What begins as a risk becomes a revolution. Still, we must acknowledge that connection will not always be clean or easy. Some attempts will fail, some people will turn away, but even these moments carry meaning. They teach us resilience. They remind us that connection is not a guarantee. It's a choice, renewed again and again, often in the face of uncertainty. And this is the paradox. The more we accept that isolation is an inevitable part of being human, the more we become capable of reaching out honestly. Yalom's work is steeped in this paradox. He urges us not to deny the existential facts of life, death, freedom, isolation, meaninglessness, but to engage with them as tools for deeper living. In his view, the confrontation with our limits is not an end, but a beginning. It compels us to live more deliberately, love more fiercely, and speak more truthfully. So how do we begin to break the silence? Perhaps it starts with a phone call we've been avoiding, a conversation we've been afraid to have, a moment of stillness with someone we love, where we allow silence to be shared rather than feared. It starts with telling someone, "I'm scared too," or "I don't have all the answers," or even just, "I'm here." These small moments, repeated over time, begin to stitch together the fragmented fabric of our lives. We may never eliminate the existential solitude at the heart of being human, but we can make it more bearable. We can create pockets of belonging, places where silence doesn't dominate, where presence matters more than perfection, where people are seen and heard just as they are. In the end, breaking the silence is not about erasing isolation. It is about refusing to let it be the last word. It is a defiant, tender human choice to say, "I will not hide, I will not pretend, I will connect." Even in this fractured world, even with all its uncertainty, I will choose love over fear, truth over comfort, presence over distance. Because that, perhaps more than anything, is what saves us. If this journey into the depths of human isolation resonated with you, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that speaks to the soul. Leave a comment below. What silence have you broken lately? And if someone you know is struggling in silence, share this video with them. Together, we can build a space where truth, vulnerability, and connection matter. You're not alone. and you never have to be. Join our growing community today.